So we're going to talk about importation. The concept of importing drugs from another country because they're cheaper is not a new concept. It's been around for 20 years, more than 20 years. It has a history, though. Both Illinois and Minnesota attempted to do these programs in the first decade of the century. In Illinois, it was run by Governor Rod Blagojevich. Now, you know his name for other reasons, but the crimes that were related to his importation program was one of the counts in his indictment. And afterwards, when he was gone, the Inspector General of Illinois did an analysis of his importation program and found that they just didn't do a lot of inspections, like dozens and dozens of inspections of entities that were dispensing medicine to people in Illinois. Minnesota tried to run the same thing, and they were cited by the FDA for safety and a point that there was no way that the Minnesota Board of Pharmacy could actually regulate Canadian pharmacy. They had no regulatory authority. But ultimately, the thing that damned those programs is that they were shut down because they were not able to save money sustainably. And that's a real problem, right? If you can't save money sustainably doing it, then the program doesn't make sense. Maine did the same thing. They basically unregulated ordering from foreign pharmacies. And one of my board members actually ordered, he's a pharmacist and a chemist, he ordered from a Canadian online pharmacy. What he got was not from Canada, and when tested, it didn't have sufficient active ingredient, and one of the samples had impurities. That company was subsequently taken down by the DOJ. This program was subsequently taken offline, and it failed in court. Nowadays, you hear people talk about foreign drug importation, and they talk about, Florida's excited about importing medicines from Canada or, New Mexico. The problem is, of course, that no one asks Canadians what they think about it, and that's what we're going to do today. But they also don't really work, right? We've never seen one approved, and at the moment, Florida is spending about $1 million a month to have their program waiting, and yet it's not imported a single pill. So these programs are not viable policy alternatives for addressing issues of cost in healthcare. We will probably pass in the first quarter of the year the $30 million mark at which Florida has spent money on this program without ever importing a single pill. So it's very, very problematic. However, we're going to have a conversation today with someone, with people that you never hear from, and this would be a great time to switch back to Oksana. Joelle Walker is the Vice President of Public Affairs.
Your mic's off. Your mic is off.
My mic's off. How about that?
I can hear you fine, but
My notebook must have hit that. Joelle Walker is the Vice President of Public Affairs at the Canadian Pharmacists Association. And Oksana Pyzik is a lecturer at University College London. She's going to be joining us via Zoom, and we apologize in advance if there's any static. And we'll cover basically the part of this policy debate that no one ever talks about when they talk about importing cheap drugs from Canada or the UK, which is what do the Canadians or the Brits think about it? Because you can't do the program without them. So let's go ahead and start, and I'm going to sit down. Hopefully this mic will be on as well. Can we have Oksana on the screen, please?
good morning, everybody. By the way.
Good morning, Oksana. Good morning, Oksana.
Good morning. Hello, everyone.
Thank you for joining us. Oksana, would you just take a moment and introduce yourself for the audience?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm a pharmacist and also global health advisor here in London, in the United Kingdom, and I'm a lecturer at the University College School of Pharmacy. I do not have an English accent, as you may have noticed, and that's because I'm originally Canadian, but have spent the last 17 years living and working here in London, in the United Kingdom.
Thank you. So, Joelle, let's start with you. Instead of driving straight into importation, why don't you tell me a little bit about, there's an echo, by the way, feedback echo. Tell me a little bit about the issues around shortages in Canada.
Yeah, so, do you want me to keep going? Yeah. So drug shortages are not new in Canada. We've had them for decades. We've had sort of these peaks and valleys of when they're particularly And we spend a lot of time trying to manage ongoing shortages in Canada. And that's important because I represent Canadian pharmacists, and they spend on average 20% of any given shift trying to manage a shortage, which looks like they're either calling another pharmacy to find supply, they're dispensing shorter quantities, which of course patients don't enjoy, or they're switching therapies, like they're calling the doctor's office and getting a new prescription, and that's not great for patients either. We have, and just to give you a sense of scope, over the last few years, of course, the pandemic hasn't helped, but when we asked pharmacists in 2018, they said that 80% of them said that drug shortages had increased significantly over the last 5 years, and it was becoming a problem. So it's long-standing, and then we've had these really important ones that sometimes make the media, but on average, and I wake up every morning, I do my Wordle, and I check out this website, the drug shortagescanada.ca, and I look at how many drug shortages there are, and on any given day, we're managing about 1,500 to 2,000 shortages. Today, we're managing about 1,800 active shortages in the country. Not all of them get the kind of attention that we would like. Some of them are simpler to fix, and others, like recently we had a massive shortage of, we currently have one of amoxicillin, of kids' pain and fever medication. And imagine being a parent, like these are life-saving medications for your child. And I know there's been some of those here, but we've had a widespread number that affects any kind of drug in Canada. So a major pain point for pharmacies and a huge problem for patients in Canada.
And it's been going on a long time, right? The shortage problem is not something that just happened with the pandemic. It's actually older than that, yeah?
Oh, I've been working for the CPHA for 8 years and been dealing with them since day one. But certainly, they predate me, and they cause a lot of discomfort for patients and for pharmacists. Like, it's a huge part of their role. And I think you could probably understand where we're going next, which is, how is any importation proposal going to impact the supply of our medications? There's a great poster over there that talks about our relative size. Like, who here's been to Canada? Yeah, okay, so we're pretty large, but not everybody appreciates that we're fairly small in terms of population. We're about 37 million. I like to say, like, they tell me I have to say a ninth of the American population, but I prefer a tenth. It's a little bit more impactful. But we're 2% of the global market. So when you think about it, things relative to that, you can understand how the supply of medications to the U.S. is concerning to us.
So I'm going to ask a naive question.
Okay.
You have drug shortages.
Yes.
You have drug manufacturing in Canada. Why can't you just make more? Because that's what I always hear when people say, when I explain to them that Canada has drug shortages and it's going to be problematic if you try and take America-sized quantities of medicine out of Canada. That, well, people just say, well, Canada can make more, so why aren't you making more to fix your own shortages?
Yeah. Well, we have some manufacturing capacity in Canada. We don't have a lot. Manufacturing is global, and we've always had a very limited amount of manufacturing in Canada. And so when we have a shortage that comes up, and then recently, again, the example that I'll use just because it's the one I'm in day-to-day working on is the children's Tylenol and Advil. Like, we were not able to keep up with supply because we were not able to manufacture that kind of quantity. So we get most of our drugs from other countries, as we contribute, and we're the benefactors of global supply, as many of us are, and so we cannot kind of increase our production in Canada to meet the demand of sort of another country. But even if we had like only a couple of states, I want to say, like, that could be hugely impactful for Canada, because Florida, 25, like last I checked on Wikipedia, it's like 25 million people, right? That's almost double our size. We can't support that kind of large market. Even a couple of small states would have a huge impact.
Right, so California and Florida, if they were to decide to do this, that's actually more people than are in Canada alone.
Yeah, we'd be screwed.
Yeah. Well, Oksana, let's turn to you. Can you talk a little bit about the shortage situation in the UK and the rest of the EU?
Yes, absolutely. But first, I'd also just like to highlight that here in England and the wider UK, that there is a lot of sensitivity around the issue of access to medicines, and that we do sympathize for anyone who may struggle to get access to medicines, but that's also partly why we have a different system. And currently in this system here within the NHS, we have seen over the last several years increasing pressure on a medicine shortage. And this is tallying up to be an extra 7 hours a day that a patient has, a pharmacist is dealing with just trying to source medicine. So that has, through the pharmacist workload, an impact on patient safety and care. Not just in the UK, so we've had Brexit, we're no longer part of the EU, but we're seeing similar trends within the European Union. And there has been, in some countries, over 140% more shortages last year, last year compared to the last 3. So really, that amount is increasing. Similar to Joelle, some of those products are essential medicines. We've had a pretty serious outbreak of strep A amongst children, where it was constantly in the news, and very tragically, children have died as a result of that outbreak. And for nor love or money could you go to a pharmacy and try to find the antibiotics, but we also did try to make it more accessible by making it available for pharmacists to change the formulation, for pharmacists who are independent prescribers to be able to supply them. But if you don't have the product, it doesn't even matter if you make these allowances, these shortages still occur. And the pharmaceutical group of the European Union has done really interesting research amongst its members. This is being reported, it's being monitored, and again, in some cases, particularly where it was linked to antipsychotic type medication, that had very tragic outcomes as well for patients. And overall, the estimate from the research looks like 14% of mortalities, fatalities have been linked to just not being able to access those medicines. It's a serious problem here in the UK, as well as in the European Union.
So let me ask the obvious follow-up question for you, Oksana, which is that, when a legislator in the U.S. or when advocates in the U.S. say that they would like to solve the U.S. healthcare system's cost issues by importing huge quantities of your medicine out of your country into the U.S., is that a non-starter? I mean, I feel like in saying it, it's a non-starter. But.
I would agree with that, and I think although the UK does have a manufacturing industry, they only make about 1/3 of the medicines that the country receives. The rest is from Europe. We've just heard about the pressures that they are facing, and the rest is from India and other places in the world. So we don't make enough to be able to have that type of supply to go elsewhere. And further to that, we have legislation to also ensure that our patients' population comes first in terms of their health needs.
Oh, tell me about that legislation. What is the regulatory impediment to American policies to export medicine out of the UK like that?
Yes, so the Department of Health and the MHRA have essentially what is like an export ban for even parallel products, anything else that could are essential medicines within the United Kingdom. And these are when they are in critical shortage, anything that's short supply, they just block it by putting it on this list. So if we did feel at any point that there would be a additional strain, again, the population in the UK is only 67 million, so a lot smaller again. If that were to be affected, there is this existing mechanism by which these medicines would be added to the list, and the manufacturers then would be fined, and other penalties would ensue for breaking that.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Joelle. So this idea has been around of exporting bulk quantities of medicine out of the Canadian drug supply for a while. I remember first hearing about it in 2000. And Canada has been listening to us propose it for 23 years. So what has the reaction been like in Canada, and what sort of regulatory responses have you seen to that concern?
Yeah, well, I was just joking last night. Actually, it was in the West Wing, in an episode of the West Wing in, I think, like 1997. So it has been around for a while, and I don't think we look at this issue, and it's not an issue of not wanting to share what we have. I think we're very sympathetic as well to what the challenges are to that. I think our government has taken a look at this issue and sort of done a very similar approach to the UK in saying that we're going to restrict the exportation of drugs, particularly if it's at risk of a shortage. Sometimes the risk of the shortage actually comes from the exportation, so we keep a very close eye on that. But I think the other thing that's important to remember is that our actors in Canada, our wholesalers, our pharmacies have also expressed that they are not in a position to do this. And so I would worry, certainly from a U.S. standpoint, that you'll be maybe looking at some of those gray actors in bringing supply into country, because most of the the well-known and established companies are saying, no, we can't do that just because there is no supply. So we have both like a voluntary approach in Canada of folks in the supply chain who have said that they will not participate, and then we have some regulation to help protect it. But one of my biggest concern, again, I spend like 40%, 50% of my time working on shortages, which if you knew sort of my bigger role, that's a lot. I do advocacy for the association, so we have lots of issues on the go. It's a major pain point, and one of the things that we've learned recently is even the risk and the publicity that comes with these proposals could cause panic buying by Canadians, and that worries me a lot, because we've seen that now a few times in the context of COVID. As soon as COVID hit, people were running to their pharmacies to renew their prescriptions early, and that itself caused a shortage because there just wasn't enough supply. The supply is committed to the country, and sort of we get monthly supply coming in. It's periodic so that we can continue to maintain sort of the distribution. But if everyone goes to their pharmacy tomorrow and says, I want to renew my prescriptions for 3 months, there's not enough supply in the country to deal with that.
Wow. Let's turn back to Oksana, maybe for the last question, unless you have point you want to make. Oksana, are you worried as the debate begins to move on the topic of bulk importing medicine from the UK, since Canada has seemed to have shut it down quite a bit? Are you worried that even discussions of policy might cause panic buying and hoarding that would create a shortage where there wasn't one in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, again, the great examples have been during this period through COVID-19, where many common products with OTC, medical devices, all of these people rushed to the pharmacy to be able to try and stock up, and were also disappointed when pharmacists were saying, you're not going to be able to get a whole year's supply in one go. So I think certainly that's common across whenever there are shortages or perception of shortage, where people do feel that they don't want to go without. It is, again, critical medicines that people are, there is real fear when it comes to not being able to get medicines, and we did see that over the past 3 years. So I think there's that one element of it as well, and I think that during the Strep A outbreak as well, we did see that people were then considering going to, if they couldn't get it from the pharmacy, where else can they get it from? And this is where things are become extremely concerning, because if they're regular routes with their trusted pharmacist and all the things that they're doing correctly anyhow, but out of desperation to protect their child or their family or their own health, they may go to unverified sources, online. We see that there's a lot of research to indicate that verification of legal online pharmacies is not particularly high as well. And that can really create a great opportunity for criminals to exploit, pivot towards whatever the current shortage aspect is around, or the perception. And we did see these groups pivot. They went from some of the more common lifestyle medications toward more COVID products and whatever the current issue is. They're very quick to identify where the demand would be. And in that case, I think there is a real danger that we already see that in times of shortages, this is when the sort of black market sales peak. And again, people may even unwittingly go to sites that they believe are CanadaDrugs.com, but it's really not, and end up tragically losing their lives. And also around the world, very recently, we have seen diethylene glycol. This is an industrial solvent used in brake fluid, And antifreeze is highly toxic, and it causes acute kidney failure in children. And this came out of a generic manufacturers in India. And so if you were going to try and source things outside of the system, we saw across 3 continents mass poisoning, and hundreds of children, over 300 children died as a result of this. So it's not, there are risks, and shortages exacerbate them and allow for criminals to either create substandard or falsified type products.
Joelle, we're going to go to you for the last question.
Oh, okay.
Are you afraid of criminals entering your supply chain either from perceived shortages or real shortages that might be induced either by natural supply chain issues or by hoarding related to American programs?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid of criminals just generally, but I'm definitely concerned about them coming in. And I think that we see the same stats, right? When we ask people periodically, we had a big EpiPen shortage a while ago. People are going to online sources. It's so much easier. People were actually like going on Kijiji. Do you have Kijiji here? Is that, yes, Kijiji's everywhere?
It's everywhere.
Okay, sorry. Kijiji, and people were trying to barter, sell the supply that they had at home. That's very unregulated, and that's very harmful to patients, right? So we had, I think there's lots of opportunities for people to come in, and it can be gray, it can be sometimes completely illegal, and some of it can be a little bit concerning, and we see a lot of websites that have sort of the Canadian flag and that purport to be Canadian, but they're not, or they're acting maybe outside of the Canadian context. But because we have such a great reputation, like our system is safe when it is in the legal supply chain, but when it's outside of that and people are looking to those opportunities just to make money, it is a challenge. But I mean, the proposal for importation to me is concerning just because it has so much potential to harm patients that we work with. But I think it also has a potential to harm Americans who are looking to Canadian sources, but not necessarily being able to discern whether it's a legit supply chain.
Well, and I said that was the last question, but I'm going to ask you one more question because I have an expert in Canadian pharmacy with me. So I think a lot of people who see these websites that say they're Canadian pharmacies think that it's legal to give them a copy of their prescription from an American doctor and have a Canadian pharmacist fill it. Is that legal?
Right, so you need a prescription from somebody who's licensed in Canada. And what I think has happened a lot, what we've seen is that there are folks who are signing off on prescriptions, but they don't have your full medical record. They don't know what you're taking. They're just writing a prescription, and that's not good patient care either. Usually we recommend that you go to a pharmacy for all of your medications because they have your full medication profile. They can decide if there's any interactions. So to get medications from Canada, you need it to be signed by a Canadian physician or a prescriber, and the pharmacy will dispense only according to those. So if that's not happening, then you should probably ask yourself some questions.
They're operating maybe illegally, to use a word.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Joelle. Thank you, Oksana, for your time today. We're going to move to the next panel. Just give us a minute or two to get everybody up here and change the nameplates. But
Thanks very much, and I'm around if anybody has any questions afterwards.